Oh, hey there. Didn't see you there. How you doing? I'm just enjoying my day off here, and it got me thinking. I was off work today, and I started pondering, the reason why I'm off work today. Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Last year, on this day, I released a video talking about some of the misconceptions about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I started thinking about it, and then I went on Twitter earlier today. That's always a mistake, isn't it? Yeah. But I saw that Republicans and right-wingers were still at it, even long after their grift had become obvious. They were still co-opting the image and misrepresenting and twisting the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I got to thinking, honestly, every single year after his death, they have worked more and more to whitewash the history of this man. And every single year. In the decades that followed his death, his life and his movement and his activism has fallen victim to an incredible amount of ahistoric tampering and propaganda. It is just whitewashing. That's just what you call it. So the realization came to me that as long as I have this channel, I could literally go every year and make another video about another way that people misconceive. There are misconceptions about MLK, about his life, about his purpose, about his goals. I could do this every year. So, in keeping with that great tradition, let's talk again about MLK and the concept of peaceful interaction and nonviolence. Okay, so the first thing you got to realize when you're talking about MLK is you got to remember the guy lived in the South. He lived in the Jim Crow South. He wasn't an idiot. He wasn't stupid. He was college educated and he had common sense. He knew that what he was advocating for would make him a target. He knew that what he wanted to do, the world he wanted to see, not everybody wanted to see that world, and that people would come to blows. People would resort to violence to stop him from seeing that world. So I think a big misconception that we have about him is portraying him as this kind, doting Southern minister who abhorred violence and who would never consider harming another human being, a complete and utter pacifist. And I think that this is part of the defanging and whitewashing of MLK, making him less threatening to the systems of capitalism and white supremacy that are still very much in place. They had to do that, you see, because he was a public figure that, despite a lot of his opposition at the time, him and his legacy would go on to be beloved by the majority of the country, white, black, whatever. Everybody, people from all walks of life started to resonate with his message and really understood where he was coming from. So they knew that no matter what, you couldn't go on and keep vilifying this man. And now, here in the present day, some decades removed from the Civil Rights Act, there was a line in the sand drawn that those people who were pro-Jim Crow are now universally on the wrong side of history. Never mind how many people now who probably would have been pro-Jim Crow, or never mind all the white moderates in the Republican Party now, or even the Democratic Party, who would have been wringing their hands and complaining about him being a rabble-rouser and about his tactics of civil disobedience and probably throwing, 1350 statistics at him or something like that, Nonetheless, they've decided that he is an indisputable civil rights icon. And if you're someone who has anything negative to say about MLK, then you're one of the bad people. And the bad people, they're the ones to be shunned and disowned, because that's how systemic racism works. You just have to tar and feather all the bad racists, and then once they're all gone, we have our utopia. Obviously, this is utter nonsense. But my original point, MLK was not stupid. And he was not necessarily reckless either. In their portrayal of him as this doting Southern minister, many people leave out the fact that chances are if you went back in time right now and spoke to MLK when he was alive, he'd probably be carrying a firearm, a concealed one. This is true. MLK carried a gun with him as many places as he could on his person, because he knew that a sizable portion of his opposition had guns and were not afraid to use them. I mean, that is, after all, how he died. There had been attempts on his life prior to his assassination that put him up in the hospital for days on end. There's even a great account by someone who visited his house, and they used the term arsenal to describe it. The man had shotguns, rifles, handguns. They were even warned by close friend and fellow organizer of MLK, Bayard Rustin, to watch where they sat, because they nearly sat on 2 handguns on an armchair. Bayard Rustin was an interesting fellow. I made a video about him. You should watch it. So, what we learn when we think about MLK is that he was very much a gun owner. You could argue maybe even a Second Amendment supporter, if that's how you want to flavor it. But he understood that black people also needed to exercise their right to bear arms. Because at times it wasn't safe for people like him. And it wasn't just him. It wasn't just him. His neighbors were armed, too. And the neighbors on either side of his house would actually take turns watching and standing guard over his house while he was away. That's community building right there, you know? And just think for a second how much this goes against our preconceived notions about this man. Think about how they portray him in media and how they talk about him in this breathless, flowery language. Think about how they describe him in his suit and with his kind words, reaching out to people with messages of peace and solidarity. I mean, a lot of that still exists. He wanted a world governed by peace. He wanted a world governed by solidarity. He wanted to see a world post-capitalism. He wanted to see a world of racial harmony. But he understood that sometimes these things had growing pains. Sometimes these things didn't come easy. And sometimes there was opposition to social change. Opposition that people may not expect. So I think that's something that everybody should keep in mind when we talk about MLK, or when we talk about Malcolm X, or we talk about Bayard Rustin, or we talk about Medgar Evers, really anybody, that at the end of the day, this is our lives. And sometimes, even though we are advocating for peace, it never hurts to be prepared for war. Ultimately, MLK gave his life for what he believed in. And he had both white nationalists and white supremacists and Ku Klux Klansmen trying to attack him. He had his own government wiretapping his calls, telling him that he should kill himself, threatening to expose sordid affairs because they wanted him to sit down and shut up as well. They wanted him to accept that things had come far enough, and he didn't. And he was taken out on a balcony by an assassin's bullet. So, some of his concerns were very real. And maybe, just maybe, We need to keep that in mind when we think about what we're dealing with in this country right now. If asked why I believe in being armed, it's because I know that the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and the Alt Knights and the militiamen and all those other fools and just your general MAGA flotsam and jetsam are all armed, heavily armed. There are people that have stashes of weapons throughout this country who are the same ones actively pushing the narrative of an impending race war. And they want that impending race war because that will allow them to get their ultimate goal. And their ultimate goal is wholesale slaughter of minorities and marginalized people. That's what they want to do. They want the societal pretense, they want the societal pretense to be dropped just enough so that they can just start going door to door and taking out their black neighbors, their gay neighbors, their Jewish neighbors, their disabled neighbors. And unfortunately, a lot of their ranks have veterans among them. Lots of veterans among their ranks. So we're talking about people with experience with firearms, people with experience with military maneuvers, people with connections and knowledge on how to get firearms, how to get armor, people who have inroads with local law enforcement. Starts to feel like there's a whole world against you out there. Now, I don't say this to make you paranoid. I guess ultimately, I would just leave you with a saying that I heard once that I kind of like, you know. The old saying was, the pen is mightier than the sword. But I always like an amendment to that saying that says, it's good to keep a sword around too, just in case you need it. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please click the little thumbs up like button and make sure to click subscribe if you want to see more videos, and please, please, please click the bell for notifications. Oftentimes, my videos do not surface in the algorithm, and this really helps my audience catch my videos as they are released. Follow me on Twitter at car_YZ for my latest stock trading tips. Follow me on Twitch at car_YZ, where I play games, give lectures, have interviews, and occasionally work on music. And if you are so inclined to support the channel, I do have a Patreon. Thanks again.